When I was a really young boy, I had a dream about aliens coming into my house. I was hiding behind a staircase where I could see between the actual case, and the alien walks in and it looks straight at me like it could see in the dark. I woke up. It was a nightmare as a child. In this conversation, we're going to be discussing the recent sightings of these unidentified objects by three aircrafts, if you will, that are picking them up on their cameras. And it's big hype in the news right now. Even my own blood brother, my best friend, Kurt, he thinks there's something more going on, and I understand why. Even Dr. Robert Price has made mention of this on our own channel, but I'm highly skeptical. I'm very cautious to draw conclusions that don't make sense in the reality that we live in. Now, someone might say, you're too cautious, meaning you're going to be ruling out evidence that might work in the favor of some other option, and that's possible. That can happen. But in these cases, you let me know if I'm doing that, or if what he says, Mick West, makes the best sense. We are MythVision. Welcome back to MythVision Podcast. Derek Lambert, your host. Ladies and gentlemen, there is some controversial stuff going on right now. It's been going on for decades, right? The idea of unidentified objects, aliens, greens and blues and grays, and people being abducted, and you name it. Well, right now, on the news, it's like a hot thing, and people who are open to these ideas are convinced that this is real. These are real sightings. So I want to introduce if I can use the word skeptic, someone who's going to critically analyze some of the videos that have been out there on the news saying we have sightings of UFOs. We have, I'll say, aliens for some people. Mick West, welcome to MythVision Podcast. I appreciate you joining me, but this is something you've been doing for a while, it sounds.
It is. Although I've kind of only been into aliens for maybe the last 4 or 5 years in a kind of a big way. I mean, I say aliens, it's really UFOs that I'm interested in. I've historically been more interested in various other conspiracy theories, and I kind of got into the whole UFO investigation thing via looking into chemtrails. That conspiracy theory about spraying in the sky, and a lot of that was about identifying what you're looking at in the sky and looking at planes. And so I kind of got good at tracking down planes, and now I'm getting better at tracking down various unidentified objects in the sky.
Well, I have quite a bit of friends who they don't care for the word conspiracy theorist,
Sure.
But it seems derogatory. But they definitely think, the Earth's flat, or vaccines are fake, or this whole COVID thing's fake, or microchips, or 9/11. The list goes on, and everyone has their own flavor. So someone might go, yeah, all those guys are crazy, but 9/11 was an inside. Everyone has a different degree of conspiracy they're willing to accept. And today we're going to talk about these unidentified objects that are, aliens coming to visit us, and that they're going to declassify all this material supposedly so the whole world will know the truth of aliens. My brother actually thinks that aliens are real. Kurt Lambert, you're watching this now. Stay tuned, my friend. I hope you enjoy hearing what Mick says. And ladies and gentlemen, if you will, go subscribe to his channel. He has so much material on various conspiracy ideas, of course, the recent UFO sightings and other things like that. And you dealt with 9/11, you deal with, you name it, and you probably talk about it here on the channel on YouTube. And make sure you guys hit that bell, hit all, so you're notified whenever he drops another video. He also has a book here on Amazon, Escaping the Rabbit Hole, How to Debunk Conspiracy Theories. Are you the one who reads your own audiobook?
No, they found an English actor, so it's someone with a posh English accent, but it's not actually me.
Okay, well, you can listen to it as well as read it. If you guys are interested in that, that's something worth doing. Metabunk.org is a website also where you probably know somebody, I know I do, that could use listening to someone who's critical and explaining what's probably happening in these scenarios. What's most likely to occur? And that's something I'm big into. And for those of you tuning in, this has been released early on my Patreon. So if you haven't joined Patreon, you want early access to everything. And I plan on doing new things. There are so many scholars and different people that I talk to. Join the Patreon. You guys help us grow. Keep the lights on. All right. Mr. West, how do we begin this? I'd like to have you maybe introduce us into what's currently happening and take us into the big problem.
Well, I guess the big story right now is that sometime this month there's supposed to be a report released into what the government knows and what it is doing about UAPs. And UAPs is basically the more politically correct term for UFOs, because the term UFOs has been used for many years to indicate flying saucers or alien spaceships and things. People who actually study things that are unidentified in the sky feel like it gives them a bad rap, like the people who don't like the term conspiracy theorists. They don't. They think it's kind of a slander in a way. So that they changed the name to UAPs, and this is something that came from the British, actually. I think like maybe, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, they started using this term just as a more specific and less hyperbolic term. So anyway, there's this report coming out on UAPs. The way it came about was like at the end of last year, some language was inserted into a bill by Marco Rubio, essentially, who was the then chair of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, I believe. And that bill was just, it kind of like, it's like kind of one of those bills where it just, they slot in a bunch of stuff and it gets carried along. It's not like Congress voted on this or anything. I mean, they did, but they voted on it as part of a big omnibus bill where they just said, oh, yeah, we've got to get our $1.6 trillion out, so who cares about, this little thing in the corner. So anyway, Marco Rubio gets this language in the bill. Now we've got this report coming up, and supposedly it is going to tell us what the government knows about UAPs. I think that's probably not going to be that much. I think what's really going on is that we have reports of unidentified flying objects, and that's just something that naturally happens regardless of whether they are visiting aliens or not. You're going to have reports of unidentified flying objects because some things are just going to be too far away to tell what they are. We're going to have too little information. Sometimes equipment is going to malfunction, and sometimes people are going to see things that they can't immediately understand what they are. There's things like visual illusions or actual atmospheric effects, or sometimes actual flying objects that look like they're one thing when they're actually another because of perspective. You can't tell exactly what's going on. So we're going to get these reports of unidentified flying objects. There are also very real issues, like there's the real issue of a foreign power sending a spy aircraft of some sort to spy on us, possibly small ones like drones, or even slightly bigger things like larger drones, like the drones that we use to spy on people. So there are real issues as well mixed in with that. But it's kind of got this kind of association now with the idea of aliens. So there's a whole bunch of things at play here, and it's all very interesting.
The way you phrase that, you are well articulating exactly the issue here, and I confidently say this on my channel all the time. I'm biasly looking for a natural explanation. Not trying to do that because I don't want to believe in something that's what everyone else is saying. God, aliens, angels, demons, devils, whatever it might be, leprechauns, you name it. But it's because it seems the least likely for me, as well as other people who do people rise from the dead? I'd like to see it. Yeah. And know that it happened. And I don't want to knock people, but I'm saying this same thing goes over to UFOs. To me, it's more likely than people rising from the dead that there's life on other planets, and that somehow possibly they're more advanced and are capable of coming here. However, I'm not convinced. I've seen so many different videos and so many different things, but what we're going to show today, I think actually shows up on the news. This isn't, this is like actual big news right now, unlike what we've seen in the past, maybe.
Yeah, it is. And I think this is part of a culmination of a process that's been going on for a number of years. There are people who, since the 1940s, I mean, obviously not the same people, but there's been a stream of people who believe that UFOs represent something of immense significance to humankind. which generally means that they think it's some kind of aliens or some kind of what they call ultra-terrestrials, like some kind of people from another dimension or people from the future, or even another race of people living within the Earth, or a race of creatures living within the Earth or nearby, or something like that. But something really, really significant. And they feel that this is something that has been going on kind of under our noses since the dawn of aviation, essentially, but probably even longer than that. You can go back to the Book of the Dead and probably find references to things flying around in the sky, just if you look hard enough. But really, we're talking about UFOs, and the UFO kind of thing started in the 1940s, the late 1940s. I think 1947, there was the very first reports where someone described something flying along, skipping along like a saucer, I think they said it was. And they described the shape as, I think, kind of an arc shape, but the media actually picked up on the saucer thing and described it as a flying saucer. And ever since then, we've seen more things that are actually saucer-shaped. So it's kind of like one of those things, you see what you're looking for. You look for flying saucers, you'll see flying saucers. If you look for flying bananas, you'll probably see flying bananas. But yeah, this is something that's been going on for a long time. And what happened, I think, in, let's see, 2017 was kind of the turning point in some ways, because we got this story in the New York Times, which is where these videos were first released or publicized, when had been out for a lot longer. But they were kind of released to the public as if these are official Navy videos of UFOs, which kind of the media took to mean that this is the Navy, the US government, admitting that UFOs are real and hence probably aliens are real. When all it was the Navy had these videos of things that they couldn't actually identify, and they said, yes, this was taken by the Navy, and we're not going to tell you anything at all about them because our investigations would be classified, because it involves classified systems. An interesting thing about the videos is they're all shot with the same type of camera. It's called an ATFLIR. ATFLIR camera as advanced targeting forward-looking infrared camera. It's as a pod. I think they cost like $10 million per pod or something like that, and they hang on the underneath of the plane. And it's made by Raytheon, and it's a top secret system. If you look for videos that were taken with this system, you won't find any, because it's so classified that the very best videos we have from this system are these UFO videos, especially the two latest ones. There's nothing at all out there that's of comparable quality. So that's kind of a leak of a classified bit of information that the government wouldn't want out there. And so they also wouldn't want to share the analysis they do on these videos, which is kind of unfortunate, because now it's left to people like me.
Huh. This is awesome. I have to say a question. So you're telling me the Anunnaki aliens who came down didn't build the pyramids? I'm just kidding. No, I mean, obviously you're approaching this skeptically. People have been saying the gods come down, to Earth, sure. And they say, well, that might be aliens. I think it'll be interesting to hear your take on these particular videos, and kind of wrapping our head around someone who's saying there's probably a natural explanation for this. It's something else, not requiring green or gray aliens necessarily, or demons or gods or whatever it might be. Would you be interested in me going ahead and playing one of these clips?
Sure. Just pick one, and we can have a look. All right, so the Gimbal video is an infrared video. Right here, we're showing that white is hot, so we're looking at a white hot object in the distance. Looks like it's skimming over the clouds. It's a weird shape at the start, but it switches in a second to the black hot mode. So now you can see it looks more kind of saucer shaped, almost like a top. You see a little pointy bits on it. You see a white glow around it, and it looks like a flying saucer. This is shot from a military jet. You can see all the numbers on screen. They all make sense, and they all mean something. Now it looks like it's rotating, and the rotation is kind of aerodynamically impossible. So that rotation that you just saw there, if that was actually a flying craft and that it was actually doing that, that is something that indicates advanced technology. But I think if you kind of step back a little bit and see what we're actually looking at here. We're looking at an infrared image, and the image we're seeing on screen right now, we see a black shape, and you can see it's kind of got these little spikes through like the short axis and a little bit in the long axis, and that kind of indicates to me that what we're looking at isn't actually the shape of the object. We're not looking at some kind of spinning top type object, especially as it looks different earlier in the video. I think the shape we're seeing here, the black shape, is actually the shape of infrared glare. Now, what is glare? Like, glare is just simply spillover light. Like if you take a flashlight and you do it, shine it at a camera, then you get this very large shape around it. It's like 10 times as large as the actual light itself. And that is glare. It's basically just light that's spilling over. And it's kind of spreads out just from imperfections in the optics and perhaps the glass in front of the camera. And I think what's happening here is we're getting the same thing. We're getting a little bit of glare. We have digital zoom, which makes it look a lot bigger than it actually is. The glare is probably actually quite small, something more like this, just off in the distance. And the rotation, I think, comes from the rotation of the camera, which is a little bit of a confusing thing for people to try to understand. Like if the camera's rotating, you'd kind of expect to see the horizon rotate. But what's actually happening is the way the camera is mounted is this kind of gimbal mounted camera, which can go up, down, and kind of rotate. It can't traverse from left to right without doing what's called a gimbal roll or a gimbal correction, which means it has to actually do this kind of 90-degree or 180-degree turn at some point in the video. So it has to rotate. But the pilot who's operating it does not want the picture to move. So you've got this conflict here. The camera's hardware has to rotate, but the pilot doesn't want the picture to rotate. There's no point having a picture that's upside down. You want the horizon to stay in exactly the same place. So inside these cameras, there's a thing called a derotation mechanism. So when the camera goes along, it pounds and it gets close to 0 degrees. It has to do this turn. The picture rotates, but the glare, the shape of the glare is actually always relative to the camera. So the glare doesn't actually move, but the horizon rotates. So now we've got a rotated horizon. We don't want that rotated horizon. So we rotate the entire picture back. There's a thing inside the camera called a derotation mechanism. It's just a built-in part of the camera. Derotates the entire picture, glare and horizon. Since the glare hasn't moved, what happens is it looks like the horizon doesn't move because we've now rotated it back, but the glare does rotate. It's a confusing thing to wrap your head around. But it's not impossible to understand. You can kind of get a little sense of it if you try it with your phone. If you take just like just your regular old iPhone or whatever. Let me just pull up the camera on this. Just figure out how to pull up the camera. But yeah, so you take your phone like this and you point the light at it. Now if you rotate this. Let me just smudge my lens a bit so I get a little bit more. Okay, so there we got a directional glare. If I rotate the phone, it's a bit hard to do. You can see that's probably not a good example, actually. It's hard to see because you can't see the background in this one. But the background is rotating, but the glare itself doesn't rotate relative to the background. It's a little, it's hard to demonstrate in real time. Probably a better example is to use an actual kind of glass window like this one here, which if you shine the light through the window and then you rotate the window, you can kind of see the shape of the glare is rotating. You see that little line there?
Yes.
As I rotate the window, you see that is rotating. So my screen is backwards here.
Right, even though the object's not moving at all.
The object, this isn't moving. It's just a point source. So
excellent.
Yeah, it's something that's, because it's a very complicated thing to understand, it's been a significant challenge to explain to people. And most people will not get very far with the explanation because it is difficult to understand, and so they will tend to just not listen to the rest of it, and they will just then go with the experts. But there's other things in the video that you can talk about. If you could just bring up the video just real quick, just so you can see the black shape. Okay, so what we're looking at here is a black shape with kind of a white glow around it. Now, because we're looking at it in infrared, the black is hot. It actually says at the bottom of the screen BLK, which means that anything that's black is hot. Now, so that means that anything that's white is cold, or at least colder than things that are darker. So you're looking at air ostensibly you're looking at air around a hot shape, which is colder than the air further out. So it's something very hot and then something cold and then the air, which is very, very confusing as well. This is something, how do you wrap your head around that? What could it possibly be? And people start coming up with like crazy explanations, or extreme explanations, like that it's some kind of space warp and it's warping space and that either makes it cold or it makes it look like it's cold. But if you actually do a bit of research and look at thermal camera images, you will find that this white glow around a black object is just a simple common artifact of thermal camera images. It's a thing called an unsharp mask, which is a standard photography filter. You can any photography editing program you've got will have an unsharp mask filter, and if you set it to high values, you will get this exact same effect. Like you could take this little shape like that, stick it in Photoshop, turn on unsharp mask and crank it up, you get this exact same effect. You see it in other videos. And yet, and this is kind of a curious and important point, when this video was originally released to the New York Times, by people who knew about it, they titled the story "Glowing Auras and Black Money." The black money was a reference to the kind of secret funding of this program, but the glowing auras was about something that they thought was really interesting, which is this white aura around this black shape. And they didn't know, the New York Times people didn't know that this wasn't a thing. The people who gave them the video, Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon, who went on to join To the Stars Academy, they didn't know. And Lou Elizondo used to be, he says, the head of ATIP, the head of this program that was studying these things. And yet they didn't realize that this white glow around this object was just a standard artifact of the thermal camera system. So it's very curious that you've got all these people supposedly studying these things and having a big budget, like $22 million over 5 years, and yet they can't figure out a really simple thing like this.
So this brings me to the conclusion of asking you on this particular video, since obviously there's been gurus who are claimed gurus who come on and they say, this is definitely something we can't figure out. Well, you've done quite a good job of making a good analysis of this. What do you think it is? I mean, obviously it's an object of some sort, but what is this object?
I think it is probably a distant jet plane. And it's flying away. It's probably at least 12, 15 miles away, possibly more. And it's not doing anything special. It's just simply flying away. And the apparent motion is just parallax. Like the jet that the camera's in, that we're in, if you see these two lines in the middle of the screen here, that is showing you the angle of the wings, which is, it's nearly like 35 degrees or so there. And that means that the jet is banking to the left in this position because the horizon is that way, so the jet is banking kind of into the horizon. So what you're seeing, the clouds are moving simply because the plane itself is moving relative to this jet. You can see it's actually looking at this point 25 degrees out of the left-hand window. So it's like you're driving down a road, you're looking at a tree in a field, say, off to the right, and as you go past it, it kind of looks like it's moving relative to the clouds. And if you were to train your camera on it as you went past this tree in a field and there was some other trees way behind it or some mountains behind it, it would look like it was moving along. And it would look like the mountains and the trees were moving the same way that you were moving. And that's what we're seeing here. So here it looks like the clouds are moving to the right, and it looks like the thing is moving to the left. But really, it's just the plane flying along. The object is closer to us than those clouds. Those clouds are way off in the distance. And so it's just a simple parallax effect. And when it slows down and stops at the end, what's happening is that the plane has come around and is now flying basically directly towards this object. So it's that you don't have any of this parallax effect anymore.
Do we know where this was filmed? Like, do you think that whoever flew this or the people that were involved figured out what that object was?
It's difficult to. Well, we know roughly where it was filmed. It was somewhere off the East Coast. I think the Virginia Beach training range was mentioned, and it's just a fairly large area, basically off Virginia Beach. Hundreds of square miles out there where they practice and do their training. So this was probably on a training run with someone, and they're maybe just familiarizing themselves with the AppFLIR system. It may well have been the very first time they've ever used it, and so they're experimenting with just locking on to different things. Maybe not. Maybe it's they had more experience. But it kind of sounds like they're kind of having fun. We'll see in the other video they get really excited when they box a moving target, and they're very curious about this other thing.
Let me know, and I'll make sure to try and keep the audio from being too loud, because these are obviously really loud recordings if I have them on the max.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. So we don't know what happened here. And that's the thing. Like, people kind of assume that this is something that the Navy has investigated for years and they couldn't figure it out. We don't know what investigation was actually done. It could have been just, the guy took it. The two people in the plane, they took this video and they couldn't figure out at the time what it was. And so at the end, they do their debrief and then they move on. And other people take the video and say this was reported as unidentified, and other people look at it and they say, I don't know what that is. And let's just file it as one of the unidentified things. And who knows what actual analysis they actually did. I've been looking at these videos for years, so I'm very familiar with them. But we have no idea what the Navy's done. And if the Navy has done some detailed analysis, they've actually specifically said that they're not going to tell us what the result of that analysis is, because it pertains to classified information. This video would never be released normally, because, like I said, it's a very high resolution video of the ATFLIA system that kind of demonstrates some of the capabilities and some of the pitfalls of that system. And you don't want an adversary knowing exactly how the ATFLIA system can go wrong. So if this is just an artifact of the camera that has confused the pilots, we don't want to talk about that, because that's an advantage the enemy could have over us.
Wow. Well said. Yeah. So it doesn't require this kind of mentality that, well, this must be a deeper it's always something that we just don't have the context. And when you just don't have the context, well enough context to understand, reserve your opinion. I don't think it's a good idea to practice having conclusions without actual context. So thank you so much on that. The go fast. Okay.
Yeah. All right. So again, we're seeing infrared video here, and we're seeing the camera looking down at 24 degrees at the ocean surface, and we see it kind of moving around. There's a little white dot.
Roger. There's troubleshooting.
It's an interesting video because it shows something fairly simple looking. It looks like something moving very, very fast across the surface of the ocean, and it looks like he captures it and then tracks it and then continues to see it moving. But yeah, on this video, we actually have some numbers on screen that we can use to do some very simple trigonometry. Like right here, you'll see in the bottom right, just kind of covered by the bar a little bit there, you can see it says 25,000 feet. That is the altitude of the plane. And up above that, kind of in the middle right, it says 3.8 range. That's the distance from the camera to the target, to this little object. Probably being tracked by radar, but we're not entirely sure what's tracking it. It could be radar. They have laser range finders as well, but I'm thinking it's probably just it's been tracked by radar. The radar picked up the target when it acquired it on the auto track here. We also have a slant angle, which is the angle down, which is like minus 28 at this point. So you can take the numbers that are on screen, your altitude, the slant angle, and then the distance from the plane to the object. And you can do some very, very simple trigonometry, which I have, just a very simple diagram here. There's the angle, here is the range, and here is our altitude above the surface of the water. And from that, we can calculate how high this object is. And it turns out it's actually about 1,300 feet. It's actually not down by the water itself. It's actually halfway between the plane and the water. So what we're seeing here isn't something skimming over the surface of the water. It's something that's much, much higher up, halfway up. Is it still moving fast? Well, we can kind of do the math there as well. We can recreate things because we can look at the horizontal angle, the angle at the top of the screen. That's like 49 there. So you can draw a diagram of where the plane is, figure out how far the plane moves. It's got this little bank angle, so you have to account for that. You can then draw a line at a certain angle and the range and see where the object is. Then move the plane forward like 10, 20 seconds, take the angles there again and move them along. And then you'll see where the object is again. So you get two positions where the objects are, two positions where the plane is, and you can see how far the plane how far the object has moved in the same time it took the plane to move. And you just distance divided by time equals speed. Very, very simple thing. Do that math. Turns out it's around 40, 50 knots, which is about wind speed. It's not moving very fast at all. It's probably just drifting in the wind. Another thing you can get from the video is that it's cold. When it's in white hot mode, the object is black. When it's in black hot mode, the object is white, which means that it's a cold object, colder than the surface of the ocean, which would be pretty cold, which probably means that it's a high up object that's just simply at ambient temperature, the air temperature up there, like whatever that would be, like minus 10 degrees or something. Probably not that low, but yes, some low temperature, around freezing perhaps. Which means that we've got something that's smallish, it's cold, it's drifting at wind speed. The most likely thing is that it's probably just a balloon. And not moving very fast and not very interesting.
Really? It's that? You know what you're doing? You're stealing all the fun, Mr. West.
Yeah, well, the thing is, though, if there is fun in the world, which there is,
yeah,
then we don't have to. I know, but like this is an important point, though. Like, what I'm doing is debunking,
right?
Which isn't to try to prove a certain thing to be wrong. I'm not trying to say aliens are not real. I'm not trying to say that UFOs don't exist. I'm not setting out to do that.
Right.
I'm setting out to find where there is bunk, find where there are things that are wrong, and remove those things. So if I go in there and I find the cases that are bunk and need debunking, then that means that what remains after I remove that is going to be much closer to the truth. So if there is something really interesting out there, right now it's all being obscured by all this bunk. So if I'm stripping away the bunk, you're going to get a much clearer view of what's really there. So if there is something amazing and wonderful, what I'm doing should be helping.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I think it's interesting what you actually do versus, you can go on YouTube, look up this alien thing, listen to someone who just is really charismatic. They play this clip to prove that this has been something that was foretold in an ancient text, or it's known, and millions of subscribers, millions of views. You come on showing what's probably most likely the case. In reality, nobody wants to hear it. I'm not saying nobody, but it's not the popular, it's not the fun. I do the same thing with my biblical stuff. Like, I'm always showing what is probably really going on in these texts and in antiquity. And someone comes along and goes, the end of the world was prophesied in the book of Revelation, Donald Trump. And it's like, oh my gosh. And there's millions of views. And you go, that was put out last month. Millions of people liked this, but they don't take the time to really want to know what's actually going on. It's kind of weird.
It's a lot of what people like to consume online is for entertainment purposes, essentially. And it's a lot more entertaining to think about ancient aliens than it is to think about trigonometry.
Right.
So my explanations to some degree are a little hard to follow, and I try to make them as easy to follow as possible. But Joe Rogan once said that I perform mental gymnastics.
You?
And yeah.
You were on his show before?
Yeah, a few times.
Wow.
But yeah, he's become much more of a UFO believer recently, and he's aware of these explanations. But I think like a lot of people, he looks at them and then kind of zones out after a while because they are complicated and they are difficult to get your head around. And I try to make them easy, but even then, like, you still have to. The idea of a derotation mechanism making a glare rotate, a lot of people just can't wrap their heads around that, and so it gets viewed as mental gymnastics, especially if you have somebody else telling you something that sounds easier to understand. Oh yeah, it's an Alcubierre drive, like warping the fabric of space-time. That sounds simpler in a way than it's the glare is being rotated by a derotation mechanism inside the camera because of the gimbal lock problem. But one is actually this really mundane, simple, actual physical thing, and the other one is essentially a fantasy that just simply sounds easier to understand. Like if you say, it's angels, that's a great explanation. Angels, wonderful explanation. It's so simple. God has sent some angels down, and they look like black flying saucers, and that explains everything. Just because something is simple doesn't mean it's the best explanation.
Right. That's true. Good point. You mind if I share the last one?
Sure, go for it.
This is super exciting, and I really appreciate your time and taking us through this. I have a lot in common with you on this. All right.
Well, there's no audio in this one, so you can play away.
All right, here we are. Well, let me do this. Yeah, I'll just play it like this. Go ahead.
So this is the oldest one. This was actually taken in 2004. It's a very blurry video. At the start, we're seeing the glare of some kind of very hot object off in the distance, which I think, straight away that would suggest like a distant plane. Like you're looking at the engines. Like right there, you see it's star-shaped. That's just the glare. Like we were talking about, this type of thing. Then he switches to TV mode. Now this is visible light mode, so we're seeing a dark shape. So we're probably seeing something that's backlit. It looks like it's out of focus to me. And it kind of looks like it turns a little bit if you actually scrub the video over this section. You kind of see it turning a little bit to the left. To me, I think what we're looking at here is possibly another plane again, but it's very out of focus. It's hard to see. Flipping back for infrared, we saw the glare again for a second there. But now we're looking at infrared. Oh, that little roll there was interesting. That's a gimbal correction. Yeah, just go back about 10 seconds. But coming up is a gimbal roll correction, which is kind of related to what we see in the gimbal video. But there you go. See the whole field rotated. But that's really just the glare inside the camera rotating. Nothing's actually rotating in the scene there. The object didn't actually rotate. But we're following something. It's off in the distance, and it's kind of tracking to the left. You see the number at the top is changing. It's getting bigger and bigger. 6 degrees, 7 degrees. You went.
Right.
So we're going like 1 degree left, 2 degrees left, 3 degrees left. And every so often, what happens is the guy is changing camera modes, and you'll see he'll change between TV and IR, or there'll be that gimbal roll, or he'll change the zoom level. And every time he does that, it loses lock a little bit, and you see these targeting bars on either side of the object. When he changes modes, like everything gets out of whack, and the object itself kind of keeps moving over to the left, and then the targeting bars widen, and then they zoom back in again. And then right at the end of the video, we see a couple of interesting things. He changes modes, camera modes, from a narrow field of view to a wider field of view. So he's kind of zooming back out. And so at one point, you see the object zoom off down to the bottom left corner. And then a bit after that, we see the object appear to kind of fly off to the left side of the screen. And what's happening there is not very complicated. Right there, it went down to the bottom left. That was him changing cameras. And after that, he goes back, but it's lost lock, and it doesn't regain lock. And this is just simply the one time that it doesn't regain the lock. The camera is now no longer moving, but since the object was moving to the right, being tracked to the right at a certain rate, it just simply continues off to the side. During that continuation off to the side, he also switches the zoom level from 1 times to 2 times, which is the exact opposite thing you would want to do if you were trying to maintain a lock on the object. But he does that, and it makes the object seem to kind of jump off to the side, because it's like you're in this zoom level, and then you immediately switch to this zoom level. So it looks like the object moves from here to here, and you see it get twice as big as well. So there's all these kind of illusions of motion throughout the video. They're all down to the camera. So what we're looking at appears to be an object that is hot, has an engine, like a jet plane, flying away from us and to the left. And we're simply following it, and he's cycling through all these camera modes, and eventually he loses it. And that's all there is to it, really. However, a lot of people look at this video and they see a tic-tac. Here is a tic-tac. Of course, if you look at it here in this video, it doesn't really look like a tic-tac. It looks like kind of like two shapes, like a dumbbell shaped almost, and it's got this bit pointing off to the left side. So it doesn't actually look like a tic-tac. And right at the start, it looks like a star. So that doesn't look like a tic-tac either.
I think this is probably the part that closely resembles the plane that you talk about.
Right, yeah, because this is visible light. You can kind of see it's kind of turning to the left there. It's a little hard to see, but if you could zoom back and forward along that particular portion of it, you can kind of see it turning. But people like to interpret this as being the tic-tac that was something that Commander David Fravor and Lieutenant Commander Alex Dietrich saw earlier that day. it's not the same incident, it's a different incident. But way back then, when this was filmed, this was a plane flying out of the Nimitz aircraft carrier. And earlier, 2 other planes had encountered what they thought to be a large flying Tic Tac. And then they reported back, and apparently they asked the pilot to try to get footage of it, and he did. And so they thought it was the same thing. So people try to interpret what they're seeing as a giant flying Tic Tac shaped thing, like a giant propane tank shaped thing, something like this kind of shape, essentially, Tic Tac. But to me, it doesn't look like it. Now, another thing about the Tic Tac encounter is that they described it making these very rapid movements, like it would actually zoom off like this, or it would like go up, down, left, right, or something like that, or it would tumble into nonsensical angles, or there's various different descriptions of it. And so people try to look for that in the video. But when you look at the video kind of frame by frame and look at what's actually going on with the camera, there's nothing really going on. You're following this object. It's just off in the distance. It's bouncing around like this because the plane is bouncing around a little bit from turbulence. Not the distant plane, the plane with the camera. So small movements of the camera translate to smaller, larger things like this. Then when he changes the mode of the camera itself, it has to swing in a new lens or something, and so it loses lock and it has to regain lock. And everything we're seeing is all camera motion. There's no actual sudden moves, and the video isn't showing anything really amazing.
How does Joe Rogan take this criticism of these topics?
He's annoyed by it. He thinks that I am not taking into account the accounts of the eyewitnesses, and I ignore them. Although I did actually interview Alex Dietrich last night and talked to her for like an hour or so about this precise topic. It turns out her account isn't really the same as David Fravor's. She only remembers seeing the object for 10 seconds, and David Fravor remembers seeing it for 5 minutes, which is quite a strange discrepancy. And she tried to explain it as perhaps she was seeing the end of the encounter, but it doesn't really make sense because Dave Fravor would have been saying things over the radio, and apparently he was talking about seeing this object down below, and they saw it together down below. But it's hard to reconcile their accounts, which is why I focus more on things like the videos. I think that we do have to take these eyewitness accounts into account, but we can't rely upon them as being 100% accurate because memories have changed over time, and we do have these different recollections that are quite difficult to reconcile. Why would Fravor be looking at something for 5 minutes before she even knew that he was looking at it? It doesn't really make sense, but obviously it's possible, and obviously maybe neither of them have the right memory, or maybe they just had different perceptions of the time of what happened at the time. But so Joe Rogan gets annoyed that essentially he's getting annoyed that I don't agree with his current worldview regarding UFOs.
Wow,
he thinks that UFOs are a real thing. He believes the account of Bob Lazar. Who is this guy who claims to have worked on actual flying saucers and claims to have, I think, even flown them and had samples of the fuel that he took home with him, this Element 115, and claims that he went to, I don't know, whether it's Stanford or Harvard, and his government, his records of being there have been erased by the government. All kinds of nonsensical claims which are not really backed up by any evidence whatsoever and just sound like fabulations are things that Joe seems to believe. So
that's nothing new in the stuff I do, the research I do. We listen to these accounts. A lot of people want to argue, for example, the books that I'm looking at, this might be eyewitness testimony. And even if you wanted to try and say that they knew somebody who claimed to be eyewitness testimony and that's the best you have, it's not good enough. And I'm with you on that. I wonder, it's kind of weird. The worldview of UFOs is something that he's really harped on. He also has a psychedelic type of worldview as well. Consciousness. This isn't really reality. If you go into the trip of DMT or something, you're actually seeing what real reality is and stuff. So,
wait, I'm sure it seems like real reality. But I've never done it myself, so obviously I can't comment. But
I'm not knocking it either. I'm just
no,
saying
that's an interesting thing, and I think there was actually a recent. I think the latest episode, the latest issue of Skeptic magazine actually talks about this some length. But yeah, there's this theory that you're accessing some kind of true reality when you go on a DMT trip, which if there is actually some kind of weird substrate of reality that exists below this one, then how do these UFOs fit into it? It becomes even more complicated. Some people actually think that UFOs come from another dimension, and not in a straightforward way that they're flying ships from another dimension. They think that there are other people that have come from another dimension, and they're using UFOs to cover up their interdimensional travel. So the UFOs are fake, but they're faked by people from another dimension.
wow.
And I believe this is the theory proposed by Jacques Vallée, who is a famous UFO researcher, or at least something like that. There's this interdimensional hypothesis. But yeah, you start getting into these things like UFOs are faked by really powerful beings from another dimension. And what can you do with that? They could be doing anything. It could be using magic to fake these things. It could be like this weird warping of reality or dimensional portholes or something. You're just basically positing magic as an explanation. You don't really have any evidence for that. Right. It's very easy to say, oh yeah, they're just interdimensional travelers goofing off. But that's not a good explanation.
What about Bob Lazar? I don't want you, obviously, I don't know the guy, right? I have nothing against him. I heard his testimony multiple times in various ways from different places and stuff. And I know how people are. A story sells, period, point blank. Sure. Stories sell. He's had some practice to really figure out how he wants to go about it. And he kept getting strange migraines while pressured under certain questions. But anyway, what are your thoughts particularly on him?
I think he's just made up a fun story and stuck with it over the years. I think he enjoys telling the story. He kind of says like he doesn't, but that's the
part of the story.
That's a good way of making it seem realistic. Like he enjoys fooling people. It's not like he's been shying away from things. He's been interacting with what was his name, George Knapp, since I don't know, was it the early 2000s or the 1990s? A long time ago. Like this thing came out, and him and George Knapp have been thick as thieves, like promoting this story. George Knapp probably believes him. He's been convinced by him because he's got the gift of the gab, and he's very good at telling the story and very good at convincing people. He's very glib and quick with explanations, but all the stuff he's saying, it doesn't really make sense, and it isn't backed by any corroborating evidence. So it's why do people believe him? Just because he tells a good story and he sounds convincing. You find a guy who sounds convincing. If a guy says like, here, there's a magic machine here that prints money, would you like to buy it for $100? And it prints all the money you like, and he sounds really convincing. You don't buy the machine, do you? And that's what's going on here. It's conning people by telling the story. The same story is told for many, many years, so he's very, very good at it. He's not producing any evidence to back it up, but he's convinced people, and they're now helping him promote this story.
Stories sell. There was a guy, I saw a video a while back, I'd say 5-6 years ago, where he was literally talking about freedom. It seemed very political in the presentation. He's talking about underground bases he's helped build, and they like materialize the walls, and he's fighting aliens underground, and his fingers got blasted off. Like, what in the world is... That was crazy. So
yeah, it's a cool story, bro. But if you can't produce any evidence or corroborating witnesses or anything, then...
You know about this story, don't you?
No, I've heard things like it. I'm not sure exactly the guy you're talking about, but yeah, I've heard about the materializing walls and things like that. But yeah, I mean, the idea is that we have aliens living in underground bases, and right. We're kind of in league with them, and they're helping us. And there's various levels of these theories. Sometimes it's like they actually have a direct connection to the civilization. Sometimes it's kidnapped aliens who have been they're just being held prisoner and being used to get information out of them. So that, there's all kinds of different stories, and I'm sure you can talk to different people and get different versions of it. But again, it's just it's a cool, fun story. It's science fiction.
It's like Men in Black has been right all along.
Yeah.
I'm just
Well, that's what Men in Black Men in Black is based on. Stories like that. People tell stories there, and they become cool stories, like the stories around Roswell, the alien autopsy stories. Any kind of story you can make about aliens is fun. All the stories in the X-Files. You've got this kind of, I guess, a Jungian archetype of alien stories running through human entertainment media. Is that based on an actual reality, or is it just what people find entertaining?
interesting. I guess Roswell will be the last question I would like to ask, because there's so many more examples we could probably pull up. People talk about cigar-shaped UFOs. Guy was snowboarding in the mountains, and I wonder how much tampering to these videos they've done as well. That's another big issue. But
oh, sorry.
fun.
Where did you ask a question there?
Well, it's Roswell and maybe the cigars, the cigar shape,
Okay.
which is the Tic Tac type of shaped objects. How much tampering have you found that you think is going on with a lot of these videos? And then how do you explain Roswell?
Well, there's thousands of UFO videos online, and a lot of them are fake, but the vast majority are not. They're just really boring. They're pictures of a white dot or a light in the sky that some guy saw and didn't understand what they were looking at. So, I guess if you're asking me like about whether videos are fake or not, you gotta tell me which video you're talking about.
Okay.
These videos that we just looked at, they're not fake. They're real videos that were taken by the U.S. Navy. They're of unidentified objects, or at least they were unidentified at the time. Maybe they still are, but they don't show what people say that they show. Historically speaking, we've got lots of old photos, and a lot of those I'm sure are fake. There's just things that basically someone took a pie dish and they threw it up in the air, and they take a photograph of it and say that's a UFO, or they dangle something from a string. It's really, really easy to get a fake photo, even back in the day. Roswell, I think, the official story is probably, the current official story is probably the right one. At the time, it was covered up because what seemed to be happened was it was this Project Mogul, which was a program that was using balloons to put sensitive microphones at a certain altitude in the atmosphere that would be able to detect the sound of a nuclear explosion, because the long distance sound can travel, very, very loud sounds can travel through what's called atmospheric ducting at certain altitudes. It kind of bounces around the globe, and they thought that if they had these microphones, they would be able to tell when the Russians were doing tests of nuclear bombs, because this was back in the 40s. They didn't have satellites to look for these things, so they had to try to figure out how to do it. And one of these balloons crashed, and somebody found it. But because it was a top secret thing, they didn't want the Russians to know what they were talking about. They didn't explain what it was, and they allowed this UFO story to grow. And once something grows, it gets a certain amount of momentum. People jump on the bandwagon. People start interpreting things in a certain way, and over the decades, people's memories change. People might start to believe that they saw something or that they have something. But you look back to the original debris that was found. It had this sticky tape on it, which had these little symbols on, which it turned out to be some kind of child's tape or something for gift wrapping that someone had just used to attach something. It had this mysterious foil that could not be torn, which was just the standard type of foil that you use for whatever that type of balloon was, weather balloon. So there was really nothing really there. But because it started out with this big flurry of media attention, people latch onto it as being this iconic case, because it was for a number of times. But eventually we figured out what it was, the declassified Project Mogul. It was explained what was going on, and it matched exactly with these balloons lofting these microphones into the air. So
Interesting how they find dead bodies of aliens and all this crazy stuff gets added.
But do they? That's the thing. But
exactly.
we get an event that happened. We know that something fell into the desert at some point, and it looked like a crashed balloon with a bit of balsa wood. And then people start layering on these stories on top of it. So eventually, because this balsa wood and the sticky tape thing is not very impressive, people are now claiming that was planted to cover up the real thing. So we move from an actual bit of real physical evidence, which doesn't hold up to being very interesting, to some stories. Now we've got stories about somebody finding an actual flying saucer, somebody discovering an alien body, then there's an alien autopsy, and then there's this technology that's developed from it. And it's just stories and stories and stories. So the actual evidence itself was weak. Balsa wood and sticky tape and a government cover-up. The story is amazing. So everyone goes with the story and kind of ignores the fact that the evidence is nothing, basically.
Has Joe Rogan made any comments to you about your recent thing with this thing that's coming out on the news with these aliens?
Not especially. I think when he was talking to Chris Mellon, he said, "I'm a guy who just debunks everything." But yeah, he think, I don't know, he's he's done with me for now, I think.
Really?
Because I think he's kind of dismissed me as a guy who's got my mind set on UFOs not being real, and so I'm not worth talking to because I don't think anything is real, which isn't true. I'd love to find out if aliens were real. When I was growing up, I was a big fan of aliens and UFOs because I used to read science fiction like pretty much solidly from my early teens up until my mid-20s. I was just reading all kinds of science fiction. My dad had this big collection of Marvel comics and science fiction books, so I was reading all kinds of classic science fiction, stuff like Arthur C. Clarke's Rendezvous with Rama, there's Robert Forward's Dragon's Egg, stories about alien spaceships coming into our solar system and the interactions we have with these aliens. Arthur C. Clarke's Childhood End, Robert Niven's Ringworld. These classic stories about alien civilizations. Ian Banks, Player of Games, the Culture series. I love it. I love the idea of aliens, and I love the science of interstellar travel and the science of even the anthropology of alien contacts. It's just this amazing, fun stuff that I really enjoy entertaining and thinking about what it might be like, and discovering an alien civilization would be the most interesting thing that's happened in all of human history, pretty much.
Yeah, absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, Mick West, go and subscribe to his YouTube channel. All the links are down in the description. Tons and tons of videos. I seriously appreciate you taking your time out to come over here on MythVision and actually help, if you will, expose another myth. I'd be happy to find out that there are life on other planets, or even get visited, and it'd be cool to find that out. But hate to say it, it's like all of the other claims I ever deal with. It's the same stuff. It's in the same vein that Michael Shermer talks about in The Brain, that we all are doing these things. We're always assuming agency. We always assume something beyond what is actually there. It's just natural. I think we evolved to have these kind of tendencies. Mm-hmm. And I'm with you. I appreciate you giving us your analysis of these three, films that tons of people right now, hook, line, and sinker, just and they're following the idea. That's an alien. They're here, and I want to really show this to people so that people aren't afraid as well, because too many people actually believe this and are terrified. They actually believe this stuff to a point where they're terrified. It's like the idea of hell for people. And it's like when you start exposing and showing like what's going on in antiquity, and you kind of stop fearing those superstitions. And I want the same to be done. So I thank you and commend you for what you do, sir.
Well, thank you. It's been an interesting conversation.
Well, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Make sure you do check him out. And don't forget, I'm kind of an alien myself, and you can be too if you'd like to join. We are MythVision.